at some research that has been done in East Africa around indigenization of social work from Genetic Twikerizi. It's too early in the morning here in the U.S. Anyway, Genetic, over to you.
Thank you, Jim. And I'm glad I'm speaking after Becky has spoken, because she gave us a good beginning of indigenization, trying to bridge the divide between the global and the local. And what I'm presenting today is a component of a large study that was conducted in East Africa in 4 East African countries, including Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Rwanda. It's also part of a large project to professionalize social work in East Africa, and it is being funded by the Austrian Development Corporation. Last year we did an empirical research on the role of social work in social development and poverty reduction and the realization of Millennium Development Goals. And part of a component of that study was to look at the social work curriculum and its adequacy in preparing social workers for culturally relevant practice, or what you call indigenized processes of social work. So this presentation will give you an overview of that study and also talk briefly about the social work education in East Africa, give you the profile of the educators that were involved in that study, and then we go to specific aspects that we looked at under indigenization. Specifically, we assessed use of local knowledge and resources in education, and then looked at the level of engagement in local research, and also integration of cultural issues in the curriculum. Finally, point out some of the challenges faced in indigenization of social work education, and also make some suggestions. I've already talked about the study and it being part of a larger project to professionalize social work in East Africa. And 1,831 people participated in this study, including social work practitioners, employers, social work educators, students, policymakers, and we also conducted 24 focus group discussions with clients or service users of the social services or social work services. To give you just a brief overview of social work education in East Africa, there are different categories of social work institutions or universities, if you want. Some are run by government and they are considered as public universities. Some are private, or what we call private for profit, and others are non-profit, mostly religious-based institutions. And social work education takes place at about 4 levels. They are programs, certificate programs in social work. They are diploma programs, and then bachelor's programs. And so far we have only one university in East Africa that is offering, at least as I speak, that is offering master's training in social work. So in total, the study involved 24 institutions of higher learning that offered the social work program. And the highest, considering the education profile of the social work educators, the highest, the most prominent qualification for social work educators was actually a bachelor's degree in social work. Now I'm going to come to the other aspect called other, which includes educators that had their highest qualification in related disciplines such as sociology, development studies, psychology, and other stuff like that. But that also includes those that had like a BSW, a bachelor's degree in social work, but they had an additional qualification like a master's degree or PhD in related disciplines, not necessarily social work. And then what I want to bring out here is that majority of educators actually attain their qualifications from within their countries, at least the IASSW qualifications. But when it came to postgraduate qualifications, we found that many of them got their qualifications from out of the country, and particularly out of Africa. Now that provides a chance for cross-cultural learning, but it can also be a source of what has been referred to in the literature as professional imperialism, where the models, the theories, the nature of social work as offered in the countries where these people study from is propagated in their respective countries when they come back. But I'm hoping that that doesn't happen quite often. And now about indigenization of social work for social development. This debate is by no means new. As we all know, professional social work was introduced in Africa from the West, particularly during the colonial period in the 1950s and 60s. And as far back as the 1970s, social work educators in Africa realized the need to adapt social work to the African context in order to make it more appropriate to the local needs and challenges. The focus at that time was on a reorientation of social work from the remedial casework to social development, and to a practice that is sensitive to the cultures of the African people. Indigenization is interwoven with the idea of culturally relevant social work education, since education prepares for practice. We are aware that in this globalizing era, no entity can claim or even desire to be totally local. Hence, our focus in this aspect of the study was not necessarily on indigenous social work per se, but on integration and harmonization of Western-based social work with indigenous approaches. Or maybe the word Western is misleading, but of the global concepts and theories and models with indigenous approaches and knowledge in order for social work to sustainably contribute to social development in Africa. So the key aspects we considered, as I already mentioned, were the extent of use of locally generated materials and resources in training, educators' engagement in local research, because that's where knowledge generation comes from, and also the extent of integration of elements of the local culture into the social work education. So when it comes to, can somebody turn off that microphone? Thank you. When it comes to materials used in training, the results indicate a continuing of a reliance on textbooks, journal articles, and other publications from the West, especially from Europe, North America, and to a slight extent, Asia. 76% of the students who participated in the study in their final year of social work reported that most of the reference materials they were given or they used in their courses are produced outside of Africa. 67% of educators described their reliance on materials produced outside of Africa for teaching as high. Materials from within Africa accounted for only 7% of the students' responses, while country-specific materials, I believe what Becky was referring to as grey literature, accounted for 12% of the responses. The implication is that there are limited context-specific concepts, theories, methods, and examples and this may limit the level of conceptualization and application. And when we come to the level of engagement in research, we're interested in knowing to what extent the educators particularly engage in local research. And the findings reveal a moderate level of engagement by social work educators. 23% of them said they are not at all involved in research, while 64% said they are moderately involved. Another challenge that was pointed out by those that are reported high involvement is that in most cases their involvement in research is a response to, calls, by donors, since most of the institutions or universities in East Africa do not allocate a lot of their own resources for research. There's a heavy reliance on donor-initiated research projects. And then going to integration of culture issues in the curriculum. I was looking at some of the curricula that we reviewed from Rwanda, from Kenya, and from Uganda, and it was positive to note that actually some of these universities, like the University of Rwanda, National University of Rwanda, it has on its program, a course on Rwandan culture and peoples. And then the University of Nairobi has a course that looks at the government and the people of Kenya, which gives an opportunity to look at the different, cultures and values and ways of life of the people, and help the students of social work appreciate, the diversity in those ethnic groups and cultures, so that they are prepared to work, in such diverse situations. But when it came to the results, culture issues such as, traditional leadership structures, clan systems, indigenous ways of helping, conflict resolution, and stuff like that, were, according to the reports of the practitioners, were moderately integrated in the social work curriculum. And I have to mention that over 70% of the practitioners that participated in this research had completed their social work training between the year 2000 and 2011. So there's not much change, I believe, in the education system that's being offered today. So we can conclude that actually there is just moderate integration. We just mentioned these indigenous processes and ways of helping, maybe in passing, compared to the much attention we pay to the global concepts and theories and models. And part of the challenge that the educators mentioned was that multiple cultures and also limited documentation of local knowledge. There's so much that takes place in the communities, even by practitioners themselves, but it remains as grey literature, and or it remains completely undocumented, and it's rarely used in teaching. We also asked the practitioners how about their professional ability to offer culturally relevant practice. And close to half of the social work practitioners did not express so much confidence about their ability to offer culturally appropriate practice. I'll give you an example from northern Uganda, where there has been over 20 years of war by the Lord's Resistance Army, and there are so many children returning, from captivity, who are suffering from trauma and they need counseling. while there are definite processes, and formal processes of helping such children taught in class to social work students, the community has its own belief systems and value systems and ways of handling that trauma, and even a way of interpreting it. So the practitioners sometimes find themselves in a dilemma on how to handle those cultural beliefs and practices and ways of handling trauma as a case example vis-a-vis what they've learned in class. That's a challenge. And we also know that culture is a double-edged sword. Not every element of culture is positive. So where do you, as a social worker, draw a line between negative and positive culture and still remain relevant to the service users or to the communities in which you serve? And finally, some of the challenges to indigenization of social work in East Africa, as can be even got from the data that I've presented, is the low capacity especially for local research. And this results in limited publications and low documentation of local knowledge. And also there's this attitude towards indigenous ways of helping. To put it in the words of one educator in Uganda, some people perceive indigenous processes as local. And when they say local, they are meaning primitive. So if I'm using indigenous ways of helping, indigenous ways of conflict resolution, then they think that is maybe inferior to the formal ways of helping that I've learned in class. And from the institutional point of view, there's pressure to produce internationally competitive professionals and not just local practitioners. So a number of universities and those that accredit programs, we want to see more of what is the global content, the international social work content in this program, more than the aspects of the local and the indigenous. Some of the suggestions that we make based on this study is the need to scale up capacity and engagement in local research by local researchers, both educators, practitioners, and those involved in policy. And also there's need for ongoing evidence-based appraisal of the curricula that we offer in our institutions. And there's also need to build stronger linkages between educators and practitioners. If I can reflect on what Becky just mentioned, that you bring the field to class, maybe use some of the practitioners, like she mentioned, as guest lecturers, so that we can close that, reduce the gap between education institutions and practitioners. And then we also need to listen constantly to the voices of the people that we help, or the voices of the people at the grassroots, and respect what they say as knowledge. And then finally, we need maybe to initiate a project to document indigenous models, indigenous knowledge, and make it part of a body of knowledge of social work. Thank you very much. Asante.
Okay, thank you very much, Genestic. Very good, very interesting. Again, what I would suggest as we do this, we want to have 10 minutes or so to invite questions about your specific presentation, and then we will broaden this to include any questions about all three. But let's start with questions about the research that Genestic and her colleagues did. And we might start by asking a question. In some ways, as I look at these two slides, one is to scale up capacity and engagement in local research. And then if we go to your last one, this is proper documentation of indigenous models. And I was wondering what suggestions or ideas do you have that might encourage more research like this? Genestic, are you still on there? Is the connection still good? Anyway, the question was about encouraging more research and documentation of indigenous and local practices. Genestic, you might be talking but have your microphone off, so you might want to take a look at that.
Okay, are you hearing me, Jim, now? Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. I was just mentioning that for us to encourage local research or participation in local research, it's going to be the challenge of our universities and our departments to initiate this engagement in local research, to set aside resources and prioritize research so that we do not completely depend or wait for, what we call development partners to come up with themed calls, for research, and then the educators just respond, to calls and make sure that what they are writing about fits within the priorities of the donor, theme. But for the local universities, for the national universities, to set aside money and encourage the educators to engage in local research initiated in their respective countries, and not necessarily to go by the priorities of the donor. I know there's a challenge in that because we do not have lots of researchers, but we can be creative. Maybe we can initiate our own projects, write proposals, and submit them if they're accepted. Then, for example, about documentation of indigenous models and knowledge, we could, instead of waiting for the donor to initiate it, we could initiate it and write a proposal and say, look here, we are interested in documenting what happens in practice by social workers, maybe in a war or conflict situation, or what happens in practice in conflict resolution, so that we can then look for resources, but when it's us who have initiated it. So I see the challenge mainly lying with the African educators and practitioners. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that. So that is the challenge, and in some ways it's good to see the research that you talked about, which was I think your university must have taken the initiative to do it, and in some ways it's what we probably need more of on a country or context-specific example. Let me just ask another question, and again I want to encourage others of you who are there to write in questions in the chat room so that that you might have for Genestic. But I had a question around either through this research or in your own practices and so on, do you have any good examples of places or practices that combine both some elements of some of the universal principles and practices that both you and Rebecca have talked about, and then that have been appropriately adapted for use in local context in ways that you think were effective?
Thank you, Jim. I can think of just a project that is being implemented among the fishing communities in Uganda by an indigenous non-governmental organization. For them to, they are combining promotion of children's rights and, meeting children's needs with the use of the so-called grandmothers. Those elderly people in the communities that have the knowledge of child upbringing, that have the knowledge of proper nutrition of children, that have the knowledge of how it used to be resolving conflict between parents and children. So they bring in those grandparents to teach the younger generation how they used to handle these things. And within a space of 2 years of that project, tremendous change has happened in that community, in those fishing communities, that other NGOs are actually asking themselves, why has it succeeded like this, more than the projects that take on prescribed models of helping and intervention at the local communities. We actually, that particular project is in the process right now of trying to document how they've done it so that it can become part of the knowledge of models of helping. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. A very good example from kind of fishing villages and looking at kind of intergenerational support and kind of knowledge sharing. Another question was raised by the group in Swaziland, and that is, what does indigenization mean in countries with many different ethnic groups and cultures? That's one question. And then they had another one which is sort of related, and that is, where can one access funding for indigenization research, I would assume, and other practices. So again, what does indigenization mean in countries with many different ethnic groups and cultures, and what about the funding issue?
Okay, thank you. Indigenization practically, refers to processes through which, those traditional, local interventions and knowledge is integrated into mainstream social work. Now, when it comes to different cultures, that's why one of the questions we asked was, how professionally prepared are you to work in diverse cultures? We know that different groups have different cultures, and that means also different beliefs and different values. So what is important is to know, to study, a particular community and know what makes meaning for them, what makes sense for them, what is valuable for them, what do they consider as, as effective and as responsive to their particular, context, and try to integrate that into the helping process and into the so-called mainstream social work, so that as we help and as we interact with these communities, our ways are not strange to theirs. So we have to have an open mind, as we work with different communities, and also try to study the different communities so that then we can be relevant to them. I believe that's what indigenization would mean in that case.
Okay, so it is the issue of how professionally prepared are you to work in different cultures, and what are the kinds of knowledge and skills and competencies that it takes to be able to do that and to work effectively in different cultures or subcultures. And actually, I think that's both a specific way to deal with indigenization. It's probably one that is, in fact, relevant to almost all countries, because I think most countries at this point have subcultures within it and within them that these kinds of in some ways, cross-cultural skills would be very important to focus on. We have another question in a kind of more specific way from Cote d'Ivoire around do you have examples on how HIV, AIDS, or OVC programs have been taken into account as an opportunity for indigenous work for social work training? So it was looking at specifically that sort of component around OVC programs and indigenous work in the social work training. And just asking if you had examples of that.
I don't think I have specific examples, but I can talk generally about handling of OVC in our country. For example, the OVC policy in Uganda realizes that community-based interventions are more effective. So even where you have, total orphans, no father and no mother, the first line of response is to look for, even if it is just a distant relative, so that the children are helped within that system of extended family. Of course, we realize right now that the extended family has been overstretched. So what then is done is to support particular families to take on the children, so that these indigenous ways of supporting OVC in families are upheld, instead of taking these orphans and placing them in institutions. That's an example that I could think of that has come about, or that has been made more prominent by the onset of HIV and AIDS in our country.
Okay, thank you, Janestic. There was another question about the relationship between indigenization and curriculum development. So I was wondering if you could, perhaps if you had any thoughts about that, where you have different ethnic groups within the country, and within the schools of social work at whatever level, how would you address indigenization issues within the curriculum or curriculum development processes?
Thank you, Jim. That actually came out from the educators themselves as one of the challenges of indigenization. But a good way to do it is through field work. The students go for field work every, that particular period. Now when they come back, and usually they go to various places, and like you mentioned, they come from different cultures. So one way to share information from different cultures is to actually be deliberate on what they report on in their field reports, so that as they report, of their interventions and the field experiences, they can also integrate the cultural issues and the cultural dilemmas that they met during their field practice education, so that as different groups of students share their experiences, then there's a chance for the whole class to learn from one another. That's one way that I could think of, but I'm not saying that we are doing it right now. But if we give students a chance to present their projects, present their reports, and be deliberate on requiring that they also report on the cultures that they've met or interacted with, then it could be one way of sharing the diverse cultural issues in practice.
Okay, thank you very much. That was a very good and very specific example of kind of how the linkage between curriculum and indigenization. So we're gonna now move on to the next phase of this, and this is really both a discussion about social work diploma and degree programs in your country, or other questions that might pertain to all three of the presentations or any of the presentations. So, if you have a question, you can type it in, or if you have something you want to say. So Amy has a question. So Amy, why don't you go ahead? This could be to all three people.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you to all of the speakers. It sounds like one of the common themes that we've heard in a number of the presentations is about the importance of field education. And I was wondering if any of the three of you would want to provide a few examples of some schools that have strong field education programs that you're aware of, and just so that we can get a sense of how frequently and how often field education is being used, or if you feel that that there's really a very small number of schools that are using it, and if so, how we can all work on expanding it. Thanks. Genestic, would you want to go first with this one?
All right. So, of course, as we know, field education is one of the global standards for social work education. So every school of social work must make sure, or it is assumed, that all those that are doing social work program go for field education. At my own university, at Macquarie University, students have 3 block placements right from the first year of their program at what we call the recess term. At the end of every second semester, they have 8 weeks of field practice in various agencies, and after they come back, they are required to write reports, and also they are required to bring back assessment forms from the agency supervisors, and also the academic supervisor should have gone to supervise them in their respective agencies where they are placed. Now, one of the challenges I have to mention is that in some cases we lack trained social workers in those agencies to offer, supervision to the students. So a student is placed in an agency or, finds an agency. They are supposed to be learning because it's part of learning, but they are lacking professional, field practice, day-to-day supervision, because the person in charge of them is not a trained social worker. That has been one of the greatest challenges that we are trying to work to address right now. But field education also has been one of the greatest strengths of social work training in our countries, and it actually has proven to provide an edge, for social work students over others because of this. And as I speak, our university has adopted a policy where not only social workers and a few other programs have this field practice education, but where every student in the university is required to go for field education. That's how important it is.
I can take a stab at this if you would like, Amy.
Great. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Well, like Genestic just said, we do have places that do not have trained social workers that can supervise our students, and these are particularly in programs that serve immigrant and refugee populations and domestic violence programs. Often they do not have trained social workers. So we have worked to actually either contract with another practitioner, somebody that is trained, to kind of be the liaison. So we have a task supervisor, and then we have somebody that works with them. And also for those students that want international placements, I have a student that's placed at the UN this semester, and our field office wasn't going to let her count it, but the only way they would do it is if they let her be placed with me, and then I seconded her to the UN. And so we try to work hand in hand with faculty to try to provide that oversight. And just one other example is that we have many students working full-time, which makes it difficult for them to do their placement as well as their classes. So we started having a lot of weekend classes, so Saturdays, Sundays, some will just be over a period of Saturdays. And that way students can get their courses intensively and then often find time, because we have many programs that are open in the evenings. So we try to work with our students around doing those placements. And then the other would be actually giving them a placement in the agency where they work, as long as they take on a different task. But there are just different ways to try to accommodate both the agency as well as the student.
So it sounds like from both answers that it's taking some sort of creativity and some sort of practical ways of trying to address this need for kind of field work as part of the regular program, and also to make it as easy for people to do it who in fact may have full-time jobs or may have other pressures on them. And I was wondering, Dr. Akimoto, if there was any example from any of the countries in your association that might have a particularly good approach to field work. May not, but I thought I would ask.
Well, again, in some countries like India, which have a long history of social work and a lot of learning from Western countries, they have very well-developed fieldwork programs, which may be similar to some European and American universities. But in some other countries, as I said, since there are there are first of all few professional social workers because of the short history of social work on the small scale of social work education. Actually, it's almost impossible for us to have very well-trained, well-experienced field instructors. In most cases, we can't expect so-called professional social workers as field instructors. I cannot provide, since there are nearly 1,000 schools, so probably there are a lot of good examples, but I cannot tell the sporadic cases at this moment. Negative aspect could be explained a lot, though. Some countries, on the other hand, like Japan, where have more classroom-oriented school countries, fieldwork is very weak component in that as far as the number of hours is concerned, are concerned. Of course, a lot of creative individual sporadic examples, classroom, in some cases, what you call since some schools do not have field instructors, they have to have some kind of alternative supplemental class, what they call discussion with academicians. But those academicians are not necessarily have good field experiences by themselves. But they have some efforts to link between social work theories and the social work field experiences.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate your taking a stab at this, given the great variety of both countries and the number of schools that you're talking about. In the slide that's up, we had asked some questions about some of the successes and challenges around social work, either diplomas or degree programs, and we're getting responses that are writing in. Mozambique has written in that they have 2 programs, both a diploma and a degree programs, but sustainability is a concern as they're being currently supported from funding from donors. In Cote d'Ivoire, they have a diploma and degree program which is recognized by the government and are recruited by the government as civil servants. And they have a diversity of diplomas on different types of training, and give some examples of that. They have 2 types of schools engaged in social work. Mozambique added to that an option they're exploring is a national accreditation as a means to trigger individual or community's interest to pay. And Cote d'Ivoire added some challenges in there that there's not only necessarily between sociology, psychology, and the social worker schools, and so on. So, and there may be ways through in-service training to do that. So there's some real good examples around some of at least progress in the social work area, social work education area. Some concerns around continued funding and around linkages between other schools within a university and other disciplines, and how in-service training might be used and how accreditation might be used. Again, we meant to stimulate some thinking about this around social work education on a country level. So I'm just going to probably end there, but I wanted to know if there are any other remarks that any of the 3 presenters want to make before we close, before we hand it back to Amy, or any other questions in the window. So either Dr. Akimoto, Rebecca, or Gymnastic, anything that you would want to add here at the end. Okay, go ahead, Dr. Akimoto.
Just a piece of information. At this moment, IF and IEA are in the process of reviewing the present social work definition, international definition. It seems to be they have decided to change between 2 definition task forces or joint task forces. And they decided at this moment, they may change the idea, but at this moment they agreed that international definition should be short and very easy to understand and easy to translate in other in languages, and it should be understood by laymen and women and mass media. The next definition should be the multi-layered, which means under that short international definition, the second story is a kind of amplification at the level of regional and national, in which at that level, for example, in the regional level, they may develop a lot of unique or more what you call appropriate definition to that region. As Kathleen Kendall told us in 1950s, on the international definition itself is not necessarily appropriate way of approach. It was 1950s, so it may be changed, but it's certainly very difficult to cover one definition to all over the world. This is the present progress report among two international associations, just for your information. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. I think it will be very important. And of course, you've set yourself a good challenge to have something that's short, that's understandable, that is multi-layered, and that has meaning for the region. That's very ambitious, and we kind of look forward to the definition as it's developed. Any other comments from Rebecca or Genestic?
I just want to add one thing. I think, you know, when we talk about field education, the importance of field education in the classroom, I think one of the key things is really the link between the two, what's happening in the field and the classroom, because I think that that is where the partnerships with the organizations, and also, I mean, one of the things we try to do is point out to the community, to the state, to the university, how much contribution our students are doing in their field work, and really highlight the number of hours that they're doing in volunteering, basically, in their communities, as well as how much time the supervisors are putting into it. So I think really raising the profile of the work that they're doing and really telling the story is very, very important.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. So that it just emphasized the importance of the link between the sort of school, the education, and the fieldwork component of it. Anything else from you, Genestic?
Only to say thank you very much for this opportunity. It's a wonderful opportunity to hear from different countries and learn from different experiences. And also to mention that actually the study that we are conducting is part of efforts to document, you know, social work from an African perspective. And one of the outputs, you know, academic outputs of this research is that we are looking forward to, you know, publish a handbook on social work in East Africa. And I can assure you this is going to be the first handbook of social work in East Africa, but which is a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Genestic, and we look forward to when the research is final and when a report is available, and hopefully you could send us all a link on that. We could put that on opcsupport.net, and so that people have access to it. And we want to thank all three of our presenters, and it has been, you know, very educational I know for me, and I think for everybody. I'm going to move this on and have any closing remarks and hand this back to Amy.
Great, thank you, Jim. And thank you to all of the presenters for your very thoughtful comments, and also to all of the participants who added comments and questions into the chat room. I think we've had a very good discussion today. We've covered a very broad range of issues on the topic of social work degree and diploma programs. We've heard about the important role of IASSW and the very diverse range of social work programs and growth in different countries in Asia. We've talked about applying global concepts and values and standards to field work, using field education as an opportunity to do so. And we've talked about social work degree programs in East Africa and the some of the challenges that faculty face as they promote the use of local resources in their classrooms and also promote the use of research and documentation of indigenous models. We just want to close with a few announcements and then also ask for any announcements that any of you might have about the social service workforce and different initiatives that are happening. I'll just start with one that next month from November 13th to the 16th, UNICEF along with UNHCR, Save the Children and World Vision will host the conference Protecting Children Better, Theory and Practice of Child Protection Systems. There will be a session that will focus on the social service workforce as a critical component of child protection systems, and I hope to see many of you there. Just one other quick announcement that I didn't share earlier, but that Genestic, who we've heard from today, was recently elected as Vice President of the Association of Schools of Social Work in Africa, so we want to congratulate her on that. If there are other opportunities, conferences, announcements that anyone would like to make, please feel free to do so by typing them into the chat window. We are planning the next webinar to focus on ways to support the social service workforce. If you have any case studies or research or lessons learned that you would like to share on things like worker retention or motivating volunteers, creating career ladders, or creating social work councils to regulate the practice of social work, please get in touch with us at swws.webinars@capacityplus.org. It's the email address that was in the invitation, and it's also here on the bottom of this slide. Another future webinar will focus on financing the workforce, and if you're interested in speaking on this topic or referring a speaker to us, please also get in touch on that. We'll soon also be carrying out a survey so that you can help us to identify future topics that will be of interest in the new year. And at this point, I would like to remind everyone that a summary, PowerPoint presentations, and a recorded version of this webinar will be available on ovcsupport.net next week. And if you'd like to join this listserv and to receive information about future webinars and other relevant activities, please send us an email, again at that email address on the slide. And finally, I would just like to say thank you very much for everyone's participation today, and we look forward to seeing you at future webinars. Thanks a lot.